Good day, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to the home version of our webinar today. We're going to be focusing around transaction trends and mitigating people risks in uncertain times. Let me quickly introduce myself. My name is Jeff Black. I'm the Global M&A Business Leader at Mercer, and appreciate you spending some time with us today. Real quickly, sorry, we'll go back real quickly. For those of you who are on and want to earn credit, there's some instructions here for you. There's a box if you look down on the bottom of the screen for requesting those credits. Make sure that if you do, you stay online for the entire webcast. You, for all of them, need to enter your full name, your email address, and then specify the credits that you're looking to get. I just point out for the CPE credits that you also need to do one extra step. There'll be 3 pop-ups where you need to click on OK in order to get those credits. So in the next hour of this webinar, there's a few things that hopefully we'll accomplish related to our topics, and that's really educating around the topics, illuminating and sharing with the colleagues who are joining me. The experiences that we've seen with our group, we average about 1,200 transactions a year, and hopefully we can share some of those experiences and lessons learned. And coming out of this, there's a lot going on right now. There's certainly a lot of work to be done coming out of this, but hopefully this will energize you as well as you look forward to the tasks at hand. If you need some additional motivation, we also will make the following promise to you. There's some words here on the page. They're wonderful words, very descriptive. A couple months ago, wouldn't have thought twice about them. I think for a lot of us, a little maybe worn out at this point. We won't use any of these words. And if you need a little extra incentive for this hour will be a break for you from anybody making any comments or any references to Tiger King. So those are our promises to you in terms of the next hour. So I mentioned some of my colleagues joining me. We've got Eric Warren, who is our leader of our advisory area around integrations. Paul Kibbe, he leads our operating model advisory area. And then Carly McCoy, she is the lead of our culture advisory leader. And looking at my picture there, I definitely need a haircut. So we'll just move on quickly from that. So what I wanted to do was spend a couple of minutes maybe just setting a little bit of context around the environment, sort of how we're thinking about it, around the business pressures that we think are going to shape kind of deals and deal making coming out of this, and some of the trends that we think related to that before we do a deep dive on a few of those trends. And, challenging environment to say the least. I saw this graphic in the Wall Street Journal, and I thought, among many graphics and data points, just really illustrated how, not just the depth and the speed of the changes, but really the broad impact around it. And if you think about it, it's impacted everything. In the world, how people interact, how they work, from a business standpoint, how businesses interact with their employees, business models, how businesses interact with customers, all of those kinds of things. And transactions and deals are certainly not going to be exempt from those kinds of changes. So I'll maybe ask for the first poll question to go up, if you could. So curious, as you think about this environment, how is it affecting or impacting your transaction strategy for the next 12 months? Give you a few seconds to. Oh, good. You can go ahead and, I think, shut the poll down. So not, I think, surprising. It is hard right now. I think as we think about it, you're really in a period of sort of pause related to deals and transactions, except for those that were fairly far along. But again, we do think that this is a shift. And if you can go back to the slides, please. We do think that there'll be a shift. The shift will come fairly quickly, but the shift will really be in a window of transactions that we would categorize as opportunistic. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means in just a minute. A couple of things I want to acknowledge as well. All organizations are kind of at different points of dealing with the current situation. At Mercer, we're using a framework of kind of three phases. As we think about it, there's sort of the immediate react. There's a return, which certainly is not, return to what it was, but more related to a return to being able to maybe do more, broader business thinking, kind of medium-term planning, and then a farther-reaching view around kind of reinvent. And again, we'll talk about that in some of the business pressures. But everybody's in a different place on that, and that'll continue to be kind of a dynamic situation. The other thing, and we're certainly here to talk about transactions, and we're here to talk about the people risks in transactions. The three kind of lenses that people are viewing that, as well as probably anything related to the business, are represented there in the middle, and it's really around this area of kind of impacting or moderating costs, finding ways to mitigate risk and unknowns, and finding ways to maximize value. So we think those are useful lenses and kind of anchor points, certainly as it pertains to transactions and people from a transaction standpoint. So related to business pressures, maybe hit on a few of these, and I think the first one's a really important one. Certainly dominating right now is really just kind of the step back related to balance sheet health, liquidity check, whatever words you want to put there. I liken it to maybe somebody who's been in an accident or had something traumatic happen. You kind of step back, look around, make sure all your body parts are still attached, and then figure out a path forward. And we certainly see businesses very focused on that part of it. I think for some, there'll definitely be some damage, but they'll come out not in too much of an altered state. Some other ones, it'll be a sobering assessment, and that'll put in motion again some plans. And again, we think in both cases that'll those plans for many will include things related to transactions. From a supply chain standpoint, I think this is another thing along with sort of that financial health that's going to dominate business and business planning for most businesses, and it's really reconsidering the supply chain. What has been exposed is sort of the fragility and the risk related to a very globally spread supply chain, and so a lot of speculation that there'll be views at figuring out something more regionalized or perhaps onshoring or at least having more contingent plans. That'll have a big impact for a lot of organizations in terms of how they're structured. Another piece, and we saw this at record levels, just going into the beginning of this year, is around activists and activist campaigns. Most of those, have been paused or significantly paused. We do think there'll be a renewal in a fairly short-term time frame around these campaigns. They may have a little different focus and flavor to them. Some I think probably will start related to this next bullet around kind of just leadership and leadership performance in crisis. Very difficult times. I don't think there was any expectation for any leadership teams that they would necessarily have a game plan for something like this. But some businesses I think have been, it's been shown, some leadership groups have been shown that they maybe didn't have much of a game plan for any kind of downturn. And, trying to create shareholder value related to that is going to be something that, will likely get the view and the attention of activists. If you kind of take those components together and look at the other reality is that we're going to see, I'll call it a value window, open up that hasn't been open for probably the last 5 to 7 years. Valuation on assets, what things cost, will be a lot lower because of the first bullet and some people being in good financial health, some maybe not as strong. There's likely to be a reduction in competition, and these are just elements that haven't been in sort of the transaction environment for a really, really long time. So those who have the ability and see it as a key part of their strategy, there's some unique elements that are going to be part of the business environment. And we're focused on what that'll mean for yourselves as kind of deal professionals, is that a lot of these pressures and the resulting trends are going to mean a large increase in terms of the risks related to the deals, difficult to see too far down the path. And as hard as it is to maybe believe or even say, the whole notion of timelines and timelines getting decreased is we think, a very real likelihood as the urgency, again, around these opportunistic transactions pick up. So that's what we view as some of the key business pressures. Before I go through what we are kind of viewing as resulting trends, maybe if you could pull up the next polling question. I want to get your thought related to that. And so which of the following transaction actions is your company considering now, or let's say now as now in the next 6 to 12 months? And pick any that apply, if you would. All right, great. Thank you. You can go ahead and close that. Okay, interesting. Yep, if you go back over to the slideshow, please. Thank you. As we thought about the trends, we're going to focus on a couple of these. If we looked at the poll questions, divestiture was in kind of the top tier. There were divestitures before. We saw the volume of those picking up. We do think that that's probably going to accelerate often in situations where, again, you're looking at companies, perhaps they're having a little more trouble coming out of the current situations and as a way to kind of raise capital. May also be related to the third bullet down there as people step back and look at their businesses, think about sort of what that strategy or that core strategy is and some refocusing. We think divestitures are also possible coming out of that. This notion of delayed integrations, what we mean by that is we look at the deals that we've certainly worked on over the last number of years. There's a lot of instances where integrations weren't as fully articulated or as fully executed on as perhaps originally planned. Some things don't integrate because that's part of the business strategy, but there's still a lot of organizations where it just, there were other priorities that took over. Attention got diverted to something else. And as people are looking for cost and cost savings, going back and looking and see where maybe some of those inefficiencies due to not integrating, we think there'll be an uptick in terms of that. I think another one of the ones that pulled fairly high was related to partnerships and
Hopefully
JVs.
You can hear me.
Again, we see that really being driven by two things. One is this whole notion of just, still
Thanks, Jeff. As you mentioned earlier, many companies will be selling non-core and underperforming assets due to the recent downturn.
having a lot of unknown.
These sales will definitely create complicated people challenges that require speed to close the deal and strong process to maximize value.
Partnerships and
divestitures sure can get messy. They're definitely not acquisitions in reverse. Most of the divestitures I've supported have been much more complex than other transactions.
Maybe that's a first step before.
What makes them so complicated? Selling a business requires you to have detailed knowledge of the people, processes, and operations, and at a level not required on the buy side. In addition, the cadence for most divestitures is accelerated
non-traditional
compared to
partnerships and
acquisitions. Most companies are just not as ready as they should be for a divestiture.
We were
They may have a robust HR acquisition playbook, but they don't sell often, so they don't know how complicated it can be for HR. And a poorly executed divestiture can cause many unfortunate outcomes, such as long and painful separations,
maybe not the most
costly
eloquent way to say
transition service
it, but,
agreements, loss of critical talent, and culture and morale issues.
Unlike things
that don't
being
get
merged.
So I'm going to focus on 3 HR points that will help you get the most value from divestitures: readiness, retention,
together,
and RemainCo
we
optimization.
think that's going to be a trend we'll see from.
So are you really ready for a sale today? Learning as you go with divestitures can be very expensive. During a sale is not the time for on-the-job training. Now, with many deals in flux, now is a great time to train your teams on the importance of your divestiture readiness and de-integration plans. Get your divestiture playbook in order and use it to help the team. You should also set up a divestiture management office as early as possible on every sale, including full-time team members from every function and a main project manager to coordinate,
people challenges related
and hold
to that.
the team accountable.
We mentioned
having a strong full-time project manager who can manage the strategy, connect the dots between functions, and do more than just manage a checklist will save you time and money. I've worked on dozens of divestitures and spin-offs, and the ones that were the most painful were those where the company wasn't ready in advance or didn't have a strong project manager.
Really difficult in terms of the
now
impact.
Now is also the time to get prepared for your next divestiture. Understand what you may be selling, how you might sell it,
the organizations
where the employees are, and understand if you can plan well
enough
enough to avoid major surprises. In order to sell a business, you need to fully understand it. So while the idea of conducting due diligence in your company may feel strange,
Chapter 11,
doing so will
unfortunately,
pay off for all of your transactions.
It's kind of littered with those.
With seller due diligence, you can find the items that impact deal price, improve the value of the business, and clarify the current HR structure.
PE firms where that's actually their
The seller due diligence will be harder than you think, especially if trying to keep it confidential with a skeleton
is
crew.
looking at those distressed assets.
So use and enforce
And
non-disclosure
you've
agreements
also
with the
got
team
corporations that
and hold people accountable. Lately, many sales have leaked to the press prior to deal signing. Another good idea is to prepare for selling your whole company now, so you can be ready at any time. Have a ready-no divestiture data room
we've also got
built out and updated
people
annually.
going back to paused or abandoned deals.
So how well do you know your businesses? What you might be selling?
The abandoned deals is
Will it be
interesting,
stock,
something that maybe got
assets,
looked at
or
a
a
year or two
combination?
ago, depending on
In
how
a
the
stock
markets
sale,
kind
do
of
you really know
changed or
what will go
shifted.
with the sale?
It may be that the
What is
reason
the
it was
impact of
abandoned
the
is
sale on the
the
people,
price wasn't that
processes,
attractive.
and operations
With
of
the price
Remainco?
being changed, the
In
valuation being
addition to
changed,
understanding the
it's something
infrastructure
that was,
ownership, you
likely
need to
be,
confirm the legal
something
entity for
worth
the
going
employees
back
and
to.
scope.
So the one that I didn't note
For
on this,
some companies, this is a really simple activity. However, if you have
and
many
actually
employing
caught it this
entities
morning,
or
we
operate
think
in
we're
many
also going to see
countries,
an uptick in terms
you may
of
be
hostile
splitting entities.
acquisitions.
It's not uncommon to also underestimate the number of shared
well,
employees.
again, it's
And
very
if you
much as
have those
anything a
shared
reflection
employees,
of you're going to have
determining which ones
some
go with the
people in a
deal may
really
take
good,
more time than you think.
position
How
from
do
a
you
cash
decide who
standpoint
goes, and do you have a dependable
aggressively
process
going at
to
things.
make the decision?
So for the rest of the discussion today,
Where
we're
are
going
your
to focus on
operations
just
and
a couple
people? Cross-border transactions also create other complications.
of these
In an asset
top
deal
two
in Europe, 2P or
divestitures
the Acquired
and
Rights
delayed
Directive can impact how employees transfer in a deal. And are you
integrations.
ready for that
We're
potential
also
extra
going to
time
want
and
to spend a
effort?
little bit of time related to
Also,
culture.
some employees may decline an offer to transfer. So are you ready for that to happen? And what is your plan to correct it?
And the work that we've done
You know
with
the real
culture
HR
in
cost of a divestiture?
deals, which has to
Some
be
HR items in a
very
sale can be
fast,
very
very
expensive,
pragmatic,
like
not your
required
academic
severance, pensions,
culture piece.
and changing or terminating vendor contracts. Also, some HR issues can add significant time to divestitures, like those employee transfers and works council consultations and negotiations.
We think it's important for two reasons. One is
Thorough seller due diligence will help you understand the assets, compliance issues, and items that transfer at close that can impact deal price.
it's just
When you
good
understand
basic,
these elements, you can help drive the
transaction.
sales strategy to get the maximum value for your deal and avoid unnecessary surprises. Another critical element of successful divestitures is a well-thought-out retention strategy. What would happen to the deal value if critical salespeople, engineers, or functional talent leave
practice.
before the deal is
It's
signed or closed? Retention of these key
I
resources
mean, the biggest
is
reason
very
why
important
deals
in a
that don't work
divestiture.
don't work.
And not just at
What
the
we'd also
top.
suggest.
Our research has shown that 63% of companies consider a bottoms-up approach to deal retention. So the best practice is that you need to look several layers
is even
down
outside of
into the rising
transactions.
middle.
What we also
And be
anticipate is
generous
there's
with
just
the
a lot of
retention
organizations.
and consider its relative value compared to annual incentives. Would a key resource really stay for 10% of pay if they can easily get it in a sign-on bonus somewhere less risky?
Maybe similar.
I've seen many clients go light on retention only to lose key talent and wonder why they left. Also, you should develop your retention strategy early and have agreements ready to
as we see in
distribute the day you bring the
transactions, even though they're
leadership
not going
team
through a
and
transaction.
others into the know. And consider meaningful retention for the remaining employees impacted by the transaction.
A company that's been
If they
somewhat
leave, it could
taken
hurt your
apart.
business as well. And consider performance-based retention, where key resources get a higher payment for a higher sales price.
Or
It'll help
broken,
enhance
to get
deal
things done,
value
and they'll have the same kind of
and
challenges.
also retain these employees.
We thought that would just be
One of the
really
biggest employees'
good
fears
practice.
in a divestiture
So,
is being
I
transferred to a new company and then getting terminated. So consider adding a severance cushion and retention agreements for key
You can
resources.
see that we have the first casualty of our
You're basically trading employees to another team. So do the right thing and watch out for them.
at-home version. I think we've lost
There are many
Eric's
ways to
video,
unlock
but Eric,
additional
are
value with
you
a divestiture. While many buyers may not be fully functional day one
on
and will
from a
want
mic
continued
standpoint?
HR support for a period of time, the
All
best
right.
practice is to just say no to transition services.
So you'll just hear Eric
TSAs.
Warren's dulcet tones.
Most
as he
companies are
speaks
just
to,
not in the business of administering
divestitures.
pay,
So Eric, I'll
benefits,
turn
or
it over
other
to you.
HR programs for other companies. Find a way to avoid the TSA. The most effective strategy is to have a clean cutover, close the deal, and transfer the business and operation to the buyers. If you are forced into a TSA, you need to really evaluate the long-term impact. It's very important to establish the appropriate price and timing of a TSA to avoid a long-term commitment
Great.
and a time and cost drag on your resources.
Poll question number 3.
Another key way to
I
unlock
want to
value in
get
a
your take
divestiture
on
that's
what are the
often
top
overlooked in an
reasons for
afterthought
delayed
should be the
integration.
optimizing of the organization that remains after the divestiture.
Choose two.
You need this RemainCo optimization plan before the divestiture process starts. Do you really need the same level of support and functional staff if you reduce the number of employees or revenue by 25%? So press for a proportional or larger change in SG&A for RemainCo. There are many ways to make RemainCo better after the sale. So plan early and focus on the execution at the same time you're divesting.
If we go back to the slide.
It's also a good idea to form a RemainCo project management office to handle the governance process of transforming and aligning RemainCo.
I think a lot of
also, to avoid disruption to RemainCo, you should complete a standalone readiness assessment
some of the highlighted ones
to ensure disengaging the target business doesn't impact your HR programs or services.
Cultural difference.
Last, you need to consider the cultural and engagement challenges for RemainCo. When the deal is announced, employee engagement may take a hit as people wonder, are they next to be sold? Or will they have to do more with less? Possibly a combination.
Right. Research has shown for
you will need to build up engagement through recommunicating your mission, values, and vision for the remaining business. As we'll hear Carly discuss later, leadership drives culture. So it's critically important that the leaders of RemainCo facilitate the engagement and culture with their actions and fully support their transition and transformation of RemainCo.
So again, I don't think anyone would
Given the huge challenges in getting a business ready for a divestiture, it's critical not to underestimate the time, cost, and effort required to make the project a success. To maximize the value in your next divestiture, focus early on your readiness, retention strategy, and optimizing RemainCo. Now I'll hand it off to Paul for another poll question.
For integrating certain things that are more complex or less strategic, or costs associated with unexpected delays, right, for some of the reasons that all of you just highlighted in that poll response, right? In this current economic environment, and really over the next 12, 24 plus months, cost containment, or at a minimum cost management, will be even more critical than it's been. So I think one of the things that's very important from our perspective is, given the opportunistic deal making that we expect to happen as kind of organizations continue to assess the right time to get back in, and that polling question number 2, I think a lot of you highlighted the plan for opportunistic transactions to support scope and scale will lead to an increased focus on how to both mitigate delays and also assess what aspects of a traditional integration that you may choose not to delay or not delay as long. And so that really hits on kind of the 2 critical focus areas, right? How do you avoid unnecessary delays, and how can you accelerate items that may have intentionally been delayed, either in a transaction that was closed in the past few months or a couple of years, or choose to accelerate items that maybe you would traditionally delay, but with the cost implications, you may say, hey, we need to prioritize it and move it up. And so that's really where we believe there's value as you think about your transactions and as you think about where you are currently in your integration strategies. And so with a focus on avoiding delays, that really comes down to driving clarity and accountability, right? We saw in the poll question, an integration strategy is absolutely critical, both pre-close to inform planning, but more so post-close to really make sure that you're bringing the organizations together and driving the anticipated value out of that transaction. And I think the second part is the important focus on strategy, or one of the most important focuses, is really deciding early, how do you intend to operate as a new co, right? Do you choose to leave them alone? One of the famous phrases in transactions. Do you choose to partially integrate and get some benefit out of corporate functions or back office function harmonization? Or are you going to go for more of a full integration, which we don't traditionally see, given kind of size, complexity, and timeline? But I think really having a clear vision as early in the diligence or planning process is absolutely critical to inform how the organization gets after the integration activities. And that operating model, that intended operating model, should really be informed by the deal thesis. Where is the value, and what do we need to integrate, or where do we need to realize synergies to be able to drive that value anticipated in the deal thesis? So clarity on that is absolutely critical. And in the second kind of component of this, the both role clarity and focus on talent equally as important. And again, I think both of those came through in the response to the poll question, right? Clarity is key, both pre and post close, right? A lot of organizations struggle to execute because of unclear accountabilities, unclear roles or responsibilities, right? And so in the pre-close planning efforts, that accountability is absolutely critical. Who has what decision-making authorities? Where are the priorities from an integration standpoint? And are we setting ourselves up to be able to integrate the most strategic activities post-close, whether that be structures, whether that be headcount, whether that be certain system consolidation, right? Where are the priorities and who has the decision-making authority to make sure that those decisions are defined prior to day one? And then secondly, focus on talent, right? Culture, retention, leadership. Eric just hit on both. Carly will touch on those in the last portion of this discussion. But that focus on talent is absolutely critical. And I think one of the things we stress here is the resource capacity as well, right? Do you have the resources needed to be able to make the decisions in planning as well as execute the integration strategies once you get past day one? And as we heard, and as I think we typically see, we heard from you in the polling question, but as we typically see, organizations have a lot of competing priorities, and everyone's often rushing to get to close day one, and then we'll figure everything else out after. And as Jeff said at the onset in some of his opening comments, the focus on other priorities tends to be an issue that prevents organizations from fully seeing the integration through. So really making that a priority now in this current environment is absolutely critical to avoid any unnecessary value leakage in the integration planning and in integration execution. And then similarly, a lot of value in unlocking or accelerating additional items that you may have intentionally delayed in your integration or your integration strategy. And so I think areas we typically see here are really focused on some of the less critical day one decisions, right? We're always focused on what's the leadership team, what are the leadership team direct reports, functional leaders, and where are the headcount synergies that we know we want to realize in the near term post-close. But some of the decisions around integrating functional areas that may have some overlap or limited adjacency in terms of similarity that are not as critical because the value may not be as high and the effort may be high. Those areas are opportunities we want to look at. Similarly, some of the mid-management talent selection decisions that typically get deferred to the CEO -2, CEO -3 leaders once they're in place to decide. Maybe we want to accelerate them because if we clear that confusion up or we're able to get to one leader instead of a couple, we're able to accelerate the business performance of a sales organization or a development organization. So relooking at those decisions earlier in the process could unlock value more immediately post-close. And then the last two around unification of both management processes and job architecture are areas where, again, typically a larger lift, right? Harmonizing process is usually something that takes time. It has role, responsibility, process, and governance implications. But allowing those to be prioritized, removing some redundancy from a process standpoint, creating more alignment across the resources executing those processes may create additional value or may unlock costs that can be freed up because you're not running things redundantly or concurrently. And then similarly, job architecture, not a small lift, but creating consistency from a hierarchy standpoint across titles and levels may allow you to create more cost management from a title level and structure standpoint. And I think the last point here, right, none of this is necessarily new. I think where we see the value is prioritizing it and thinking differently around how do we move fast, how do we move fast strategically, and what do we need in order to be able to do that. And I think the strategy is critically important, and as Eric touched on from a divestiture standpoint, no different when planning for integration, but really having a consultative and strategic project management capability that is keeping connectivity across the various streams, keeping focus on value and integration priorities as opposed to just pushing process is absolutely critical to create more value here. So the last point I would make, right, some of this will occur as you're thinking about the new opportunistic deals. Some of this may occur with transactions that you already have in process, and some of this opportunity is out there for transactions that maybe
Perfect. Thanks so much, Paul. So just to level set, when we're talking about culture today, we're really talking about your operating environment. So it's the vision and the mission, the structure of the organization, all the way down through the plumbing. It's how work gets done and business outcomes are actually achieved. And it's how employees behave and what motivates them to be productive. And most importantly, as Eric mentioned earlier, it's how leaders behave, what they say and what they do. This is the #1 driver of organizational culture, and this is even more true in transactions and in times of crisis. So obviously, new ways of working have been forced upon us. Some of our clients have had people working remotely for years. For others, this is the first time they've had to do so. Most companies have had to learn how to get work done with fewer meetings and through different channels. Managers have had to learn to manage differently, and colleagues have had to learn to collaborate from a distance. And for some, we'll be relieved we can go back to how things used to be or how we used to do things, but the likelihood of things at work being as they once were is very slim. So as a result, we need to be more efficient. The rebound and the recovery will be months for some, years for others. To be successful in this, organizations need to operate with high productivity and high utilization, and the interconnectivity of people and technology will be at the center of successful approaches in doing so. In deal scenarios, in order to survive, we need to adapt to changes in ways of working right at close, and currently we need to start doing this right now as people return to work. So in deals, culture, if left to chance, will delay operations and impact financial results. According to our research, 30% of deals fail to meet financial objectives due to culture issues. And so why is that? As I think Eric mentioned earlier, in the wake of a transaction, employees are wondering, how's my day-to-day going to be impacted? Will my pay be affected? Will my role change? Will my title change? When the deal is announced, these are the first unknowns that are addressed for executives so they can focus on the strategy and the execution of that strategy. The rest of the organization is left to wonder.
Yeah, I mean,
and this results in costly derailers of business outcomes, such as productivity loss, flight of key talent, delayed synergies, and ultimately customer disruption. And this certainly applies to our current environment. We should not leave to chance how we emerge from the disruption. We need to be intentional about what changes we want to make and to reinforce into lasting changes in how we do business. That said, the odds are that these approaches to culture efforts will fail. More than 80% do. They fail because
Yeah,
the
no, I mean,
effort might
I
feel
would
too
agree.
broad, it
I
might be
don't
too
think I have
theoretical,
much more to
it
say
might be
there.
too
Since
vague or
you
too
added
complicated, or it simply
interruption,
might take
right,
too
it's
long.
something considered.
In addition, because
But really
leaders
just depends
and
on cost
employees,
and time.
as human beings, we're very quick to change what we say, but we're very slow to change what we do. Ironically, the current situation has proven that organizations can change quickly, and it may even disprove how we would have previously described the cultures of our own organizations. So let's think about this in really practical terms. Since culture, or operating environment, is very subjective, we use this framework, these 10 dimensions, to ensure that we're talking about culture in concrete terms. Essentially, culture is the byproduct of all of these dimensions together. That said, the objective here is not to focus on all of these. We strongly recommend focusing on the critical few components of your operating environment that drive the greatest impact or mitigate the greatest risk to achieving business objectives in and out of transactions. For example, a client who went through a recent integration performed culture due diligence and determined that work processes and the clarification of decision-making rights in those key processes, as well as clear, localized communications, were critical areas of focus in order for the integration to be successful. Talent management and rewards were very important as well, but didn't need to be tackled in the first 100 days. By gaining traction on the critical few, employees understood what the leadership was trying to do, how the combined organization intended to operate. And this was a proof point for the future culture integration efforts to come 1 year later, 2 years later, so on and so forth. Thinking about culture through the lens of a distinct set of dimensions enables you to really focus and to get practical. You need to think about all these components together to understand the culture and to address the issues, but you don't need to boil the ocean, and more often than not, you don't have the opportunity in a deal setting to do that anyway. Okay, so how to mitigate culture risk in a transaction. These are just a few of our lessons learned. Outside of the deal environment, you can understand your baseline, your critical few enablers of your business strategy and plan. You can embed this plan into your M&A playbook. This includes red flags, risks, non-negotiables, etc. In a deal setting, it's important to insist on culture diligence and start as early as possible to identify the critical few pertaining to the deal thesis for the transaction and the key drivers that are needed to operationalize the change. From there, you can align on what those critical few are with the deal leadership, prioritize them based on the impact, and drive the change from the top down. Along the way, you can adapt your plans and the resources needed to address the short and longer term priorities, and then you can reinforce the plan by embedding it into everything you do, whether that's technology integration, communications, go-to-market, so on and so forth. Finally, there needs to be a rigorous focus on execution and executing your 100-day plan. This can be done in tandem with building your longer-term operating environment integration plan, but leadership saying that this is important but not doing anything about it will be the greatest derailer, so it's really important